I'm Nikki Moore, author by the sea. I live in beautiful Dorset and I'm published by HarperCollins, most notably the Love London series at the moment, but more books coming out next year in 2020. Thanks for joining me today. Thank you for all the support so far. And a shout out to Liz Ringrose for the idea for this vlog. And apologies in advance if I'm a bit sniffly. I've got a stinking cold at the moment. Lots of winter fun. So Liz was talking on Facebook about dealing with rejection, and actually it's a really, really important topic to cover because it can be paralysing for people. So I wanted to share my experience of rejection with you and give you some tips in terms of, how do you handle it? How do you deal with rejection in order to be a successful writer or author? So the first thing I would say is that you have to be prepared for rejection. It's a normal part and process in terms of becoming a published author. And actually, even if you never get published, it's something you're going to face. If you're on that journey of trying to be published, ultimately you might decide to stop. I would really urge you not to stop. You have to carry on. My aunt has always said to me that the only difference between a published and an unpublished author is that the published author just kept going. And that's really, really true, and I've found that to be true. So you need to be prepared for rejection. You have to understand that if you want to be published, if you want to share your stories with people, then you're going to have to get used to people saying no to you. So I faced that myself in my career, and there are lots and lots of very well-known, established, best-selling, massive authors who have shared those stories. So, J.K. Rowling famously was rejected by, I think it was 30 or 40 publishing houses before the Harry Potter series was taken on. And it was actually the son of a publisher who looked at this manuscript that his father brought home over the weekend and started reading it and then said, Dad, you have to publish this. This is great. Stephen King famously, used to put his rejection slips up on the walls, and his walls were covered with them. Early in my career, I started off actually writing category romance. So I was actually aiming at Mills and Boon. It was a genre that I grew up in my teens reading. I really, really loved romance. I loved reading the stories between those two characters and how they fell in love and how they overcame the obstacles that were always put in front of them, whether that was internal conflict or external conflict or a mixture of both. So I wrote my first Mills and Boon category romance it would have been the early 2000s. I was a single mum at the time. I was in my early 20s. I had a young daughter who was a toddler. Boy, she was a handful. So I used to write at night, and I actually submitted a partial to Mills and Boon. I was really lucky. I ended up getting some really lovely feedback from Tessa Shapcott, who was a senior editor at the time. But nonetheless, I did face rejection because whilst I sent a partial in, and I was incredibly lucky and very heartened by the fact that they asked for, to see the whole manuscript. And just as a sidebar, I'm so glad that book never saw the light of day because it was not good. But whilst I was heartened that they asked for the full manuscript, I then waited, I think it was over a year, while they read the manuscript and he took it to an acquisitions meeting. But then, the end result was actually I got home one day to find a brown envelope on my doorstep and a note that says, they basically decided not to take it any further. And I was really sad about that. I'm really disappointed. And it was someone saying no to that book. And, the thing about our books is that they are so deeply personal to us. Books are our babies, or at least that's how I feel. None of my books are autobiographical. I've never written about my life, as it were. But pieces of ourselves go into our books. We put our thoughts and our feelings, our ideas, our inspiration into them, and they are deeply personal. So when I got that knockback from Mills and Boon, I was really upset. But the thing is that I have learned over the years that, it's that bit I was saying, you have to be prepared for rejection. It's a normal part of life. And the way that I look at it is that if you are facing rejection, then it means you're trying. You're being rejected, people are saying no to you because actually you're putting your book or your project out there. So it was an important lesson for me. And actually it didn't stop me writing, and I think that's a really important thing to think about. So there's the being prepared for rejection because it's a normal, natural part of being a writer. And then I guess the second part of this vlog is about, well, actually then how do you deal with those feelings of rejection? How do you cope, and how do you not let that get in the way of you writing? I went on to, so whilst that first manuscript was with Mills and Boon, I carried on writing a second book, and that went off to a publisher, different publisher. It was a romance imprint, independent publisher. This was probably a good 16, 17 years ago. They again came back and asked to see more of the book, and then the editor wrote to me at the time and said, you know, we like your story, but you would need to change X, Y and Z about it. For me, the changes that were being asked for were just too great, and I actually made the decision not to make the changes to that story. I just felt it would lose the essence, and I didn't think maybe the publisher was right for me. And actually, as it happened, the publisher ended up going out of business, I think, within about 2 years of opening. So now when I look back on it, I think actually it was probably the right decision. But if I'd ignored those instincts and made the changes that they wanted, then I could have been published at the time. But it just didn't feel right for me, and I think that's why you have to go back to it's personal, it's your story. That's not to say that you shouldn't make changes when you think they're right, or you shouldn't listen to editorial comments. Fast forward probably a good 5 years, I had put the writing aside to pursue a HR career. I'd had another child. My now ex-husband had a child as well, so we had 3 young children between us. Very, very busy time. And then I became seriously ill. So I then started writing again in probably 2010. I've talked about this in previous vlogs, where I started entering short story competitions and competitions, you know, where there was one that I was a finalist in. It was how to write a bestseller, so it was a non-fiction article. But I had my fair share of rejections, and amongst that I was sending partial manuscripts out to agents and to publishers, and I was getting no's. And it is easy to have that paralysis that I was talking about earlier, that, you know, someone says no to you, and instead of thinking maybe some more positive ways to frame it, which I'll talk about in a second, all you hear and see is the no. And it really gets to you, and it can make you feel demoralised, it can make you feel low, you kind of lose that self-belief, you kind of start to question, you know, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I putting my work out there only to be rejected? And I think it is to think about those positive frames. So for instance, you know, often the reason that a manuscript is rejected by an agent or an editor is not because the quality of the work isn't there, it's not because the manuscript doesn't meet the standards that they need, it's not because your story isn't great, and it's not because you can't write, you know, that you're not a good writer. It's often things like the agent or publisher have just taken on an author or a book that are quite similar to what you've written, or they've just published a book that's quite similar to what you've written. It might be that they don't actually publish the genre that you're writing in. It might be that they just don't feel strongly enough about the concept, but that doesn't mean that another agent or publisher aren't going to feel different to that. So there's that positive framing I think you have to do to help you deal with that rejection. You know, don't try, it's really, really difficult, try not to take it personally. You know, I submitted to agents a number of years ago, and, you know, hardly ever got acknowledgements. And actually fast forward a few years, I'm now represented by Hattie at the Blair Partnership, who represent J.K. Rowling. So I think that's my point about, you know, the difference between authors is successful authors, you just have to keep going, and you have to learn to take rejection on the chin. So there's that dealing with rejection bit about positive framing. There's also thinking about, is there anything that you can learn from the rejection? So was it an out and out no? Or actually, did you get some advice or guidance in there? You know, I always say that's a bit like gold dust. So did the agent say things like, you know, I don't feel I'm in a position to represent you now, however, and did they give you some guidance in terms of the things that are good about the manuscript? Or did they talk about the reasons why they couldn't? If you get that advice and guidance, I can't reiterate this strongly enough. You need to listen to that, and you need to think about what action you're going to take. And I think the third thing that I would say to you, in terms of dealing with rejection, when you've thought about the reasons why someone might not have taken you on, and you've hopefully been able to have some positive framing, and then maybe just the time wasn't right, you have to think about the reason that you write. If you're writing to get published and to have a best-selling book and to make hundreds of thousands of pounds or millions of pounds, wake up call, those authors are few and far between. It's really difficult to make a living out of writing. I have a day job in human resources. I know many authors who are very successful, who are best-selling, who actually sell quite healthily, and they also have day jobs, whether part-time or full-time. So what I would say to you is to think about what are the other reasons that I'm writing. And something that's always helped me is not lying in bed at night thinking, I really want to publish this book and have lots and lots of sales, because you just have to face sometimes that's not going to be a reality. It might be, but it might not be. So what's your reason for writing? And for me, it's that I love writing. I love telling stories. I love falling in love with these characters. And I just want to share that with people. And I want to write books that resonate with people and that help others. So think about what are the reasons that I'm writing, and actually use that as a way to shore you up and help you carry on submitting. I really hope that's helped. Please find me on Twitter. Please like and share this vlog. Thank you so much for tuning in again. I hope you're starting to get in the Christmas spirit. I'm wearing robin earrings today, even if you can't see them, and my decorations are going up later. Go safe this week and take care of yourselves. Thank you. Bye.